Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shilakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Okay, we're reading from Canto 1, Chapter 13, Text 27. Jai Shri Prabhupada, Jai Shri Gurudev. Welcome Shri Guru Teen Tarinam Paramananda Madham Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om. So this is Dhritarashtra is leaving home, continuing with the pastime. He is certainly a first-class man who awakens and understands, either by himself or from others, the falsity and misery of this material world, and thus leaves home and depends fully on the personality of Godhead residing within his heart. Srila Prabhupada's purport. There are three classes of transcendentalists, namely Dhira, or the one who is not disturbed by being away from family association. 2. One who is who is in the renounced order of life, a sannyasi by frustrated sentiment. 3. A sincere devotee of the Lord who awakens God consciousness by hearing and chanting and leaves home depending completely on the personality of Godhead who resides in his heart. The idea is that the renounced order of life, after a frustrated life of sentiment in the material world, may be a stepping stone on the path of self-realization, but real perfection of the path of liberation is attained when one is practiced to depend fully on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who lives in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Okay. One may live in the darkest jungle alone out of home, but a steadfast devotee very well that he is not alone. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is with him, and he can protect his sincere devotee in any awkward circumstance. One should therefore practice devotional service at home, hearing and chanting the holy name, qualities, forms, pastimes, entourage, etc., in the association of pure devotees. And this practice will help one awaken consciousness in proportion to one's sincerity of purpose. Wow. So this line, one should therefore practice devotion service at home, hearing and chanting the holy name, quality, forms, pastimes, entourage, etc., in association with pure devotees. And this practice will help one awaken God consciousness in proportion to one's sincerity of purpose. Song goes to attention. Make one for sincerity as well. गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण One who desires material benefit by such devotional service can never depend on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although he sits in everyone's heart. Nor does the Lord give any direction to persons who worship him for material gain. Such materialistic devotees may be blessed by the Lord with material benefits, but they cannot reach the stage of first-class human being as above mentioned. There are many examples of such sincere devotees in the history of the world, especially in India, and they are guides on the path of self-realization. Mahatma Vidura is one such great devotee of the Lord, and we should try to follow in his lotus footsteps for self-realization. Text 28. Please therefore leave for north immediately without letting your relatives know, for soon that will approach, the time will approach which will diminish the good qualities of men. Shivapa's purport. One can compensate for life of frustration by becoming a dhira or leaving home for good without communicating with relatives. And Vidura advised his elder brother to adopt this way without dealing, because very quickly the age of Kali was approaching. A conditioned soul is already degraded by the material association, and still in Kali Yuga the good qualities of a man will deteriorate to the lowest standard. He was advised to leave home before Kali Yuga approached because the atmosphere which was created by Vidura, his valuable instructions on the facts of life would fade away due to the influence of the age which was fast approaching. To become Narottama, or first class human being, Nar Uttama, okay, human being depending completely upon Supreme Lord Shri Krishna, is not possible for any ordinary man. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that a person who is completely revealed of all taints of sinful acts can alone depend on the Supreme Lord Krishna. Okay, sorry. It is stated in 728 that the person who is completely relieved of all taints of sinful acts can alone depend on the Supreme Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. Dhritarashtra was advised by Vidura at least to become Dhira in the beginning, if it were impossible for him to become a sannyasi or a Narottama. Persistent endeavoring on the line of self-realization helps a person to rise to the concoctions of Narottama, to the conditions of Narottama from the stage of Dhira. The Dhira stage is attained after prolonged practice of yoga system, but by the grace of Vidura, one can attain the stage immediately simply by willing to adapt the means of Dhira stage, which is the prepar preparatory stage for sannyas. The sannyas stage is the preparatory stage for Paramahamsa, or the first great devotee of the Lord. Text 29. Thus, Maharaj Dhritarashtra, the sign of the family of Ajamidha, firmly convinced by introspective knowledge, prana, pragyana, firmly convinced by introspective knowledge, pragyana, broke at once the strong network of familial affection by his resolute determination. Thus, he immediately left home to set out on the path of liberation as directed by his younger brother Vidura. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the great preacher of the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, has stressed the importance of associations with sadhu, pure devotees of the Lord. He said that even by moment's association with a pure devotee, one can achieve all perfection. We are not ashamed to admit that this fact was experienced in our practical life. Were we not favored by His divine grace, Shriman? Wow, I want to read this slowly and again. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, great preacher, Principal Bhagavatam, stressed this importance of association of sadhus, pure devotees of the Lord. He said that even by moments of association with pure devotees, one can achieve all perfection. We are not ashamed to admit that this fact was experienced in our practical life. We were not favored by His divine grace. Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, by our first meeting for only few minutes only, it would have been impossible for us to accept this mighty task of describing Srimad Bhagavatam in English. Wow. Without seeing him at the opportune moment, we could have become a very great business magnate, but never would we have been able to walk the path of liberation and engage in the actual service of the Lord under instructions of His divine grace. And here is another practical example by the action of Vidura's association with Dhritarashtra. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was tightly bound in the network of material affinities related to politics, economy, family attachment, and he did everything in his power to achieve so-called success in the planned projects. But he was frustrated from the beginning to the end, so far as his material activities were concerned. And yet, despite his life of failure, he achieved the greatest of all success in the self-realization by the forceful instruction of a pure devotee of the Lord, who is typical emblem of a sadhu. The scriptures enjoin therefore that one should associate with sadhus, only rejecting all kinds of association, and by doing so, one will have ample opportunity to hear the sadhus, who can cut the pieces of bonds of illusory affection in the material world. It is a fact that the material world is a great illusion because everything appears to be tangible reality, but at next moment evaporates like the dashing foam of the sea or a cloud in the sky. A cloud in the sky undoubtedly appears to be a reality because it rains and due to rain, so many temporary green things appear. But in the ultimate issue, everything disappears, namely the cloud, rain, green vegetation, and all due course. But the sky remains, and the varieties of sky or luminaries also remain forever. Similarly, the absolute truth, which is compared to the sky, remains eternally, and the temporary cloud like illusion comes and goes away. Foolish living beings are attracted by the temporary cloud, but intelligent men are more concerned with the eternal sky with all its variegatedness. Text 13. The gentle and chaste Gandhari, who was daughter of the king Subha and Kandhar or Gandhar, followed her husband, seeing that he was going to the Himalaya mountains, which are delight of those who have accepted the staff of the renounced order, like fighters who have accepted a good lashing for the enemy. Srila Prabhupada's purpose. Sobalini or Gandhari. Sobalini. Daughter of King Sobala and the wife of King Dhritarashtra, was ideal as a wife devoted to her husband. The Vedic civilization specially prepared chaste and devoted wives, of whom Gandhari is one amongst many mentioned in the history. Lakshmi Ji Sita Devi was also daughter of the great king, but she followed her husband Lord Ramchandra. Wow. Srila Prabhupada writes here Lakshmi Ji Sita Devi. Hmm. Okay, so basically like Shri Sita Devi. So Lakshmi Ji Sita Devi. This is fascinating. She followed her husband Lord Ramchandra in the forest. Similarly, as a woman, Gandhari could have remained at home or at her father's house, but as a chaste and gentle lady, she followed her husband without consideration. Instructions for the renounced order of life were imparted to Dhritarashtra by Vidura, and Gandhari was by the side of her husband. But he did not ask her to follow him because he was at the time fully determined, like a great warrior who faces all kinds of dangers in the battlefield. He was no longer attracted to so called wife or relatives, and he decided to start alone. But a chaste lady, Gandhari, decided to follow her husband till the last moment. Maharaj Dhritarashtra accepted the order of Vanaprastha, and at the stage, wife is allowed to remain as a voluntary servitor, but in the sannyasi stage, no wife can stay with her former husband. A sannyasi is considered to be a dead man civically, and therefore the wife becomes a civil widow without connection with her former husband. Maharaj Dhritarashtra did not deny his faithful wife, and she followed her husband at her own risk. The sannyasis accept a rod as a sign of a renounced order of life. There are two types of sannyasis. Those who follow the Mayavadi philosophy headed by Sripad Sankacharya accept only one rod, Ekadanda. But those who follow the Vaishnavite philosophy accept the three combined rods, Tridanda. The Mayavadi sannyasis are called Ekadandi Swamis, where the Vaishnava sannyasi is known as Tridandi Swami, or more distinctively Tridandi Goswami. Oh, okay. In order to distinguish from the Mayavad philosophers, the Ekadandi Swamis are mostly fond of Himalayas, but the Vaishnava sannyasis are fond of Vrindavan and Puri. The Vaishnava sannyasis are Narottamas, whereas Madhavadi sannyasis are Dhiras. Okay. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was advised to follow the Dhiras because at the stage it was difficult for him to become a Narottama. Text 31. Maharaj Yudhishthir, whose enemy was never born, performed his daily morning duties by praying, offering fire, sacrifice to sun god, and offering obeisances, grains, cows, land, gold to Brahmanas. He then entered the palace to pay respects to the elderly. However, he could not find his uncle or aunt, the daughter of King Subala. Subalimcha. Na chapasyan pitra pitrau Subalimcha. Shivapad's puppet. Maharaj Yudhishthira was the most pious king because he personally practiced daily the pious activities for the householders. The householders are required to rise early in the morning. Okay, yes. The householders are required to rise early in the morning, and after bathing, they should offer respect to the deities at home by prayers, by offering fuel in the sacred fire, by giving the brahmanas in charity land, grain, cows, etc. And at last, offering the elder members due respects and obeisances. One who is not prepared to practice injunctions, practicing the shastras, to be a good man, one who is not prepared to practice injunctions prescribed in the Shastras cannot be a good man simply by book knowledge. Modern householders are practiced to different modes of life, namely to rise late, then take bed tea without any sort of cleanliness and without any purificatory process mentioned above. The householders' children can are taken to practice what the parents practice, and therefore the whole generation glides toward hell. Nothing good can be expected from them unless they associate with sadhus. Like Dhritarashtra, the materialistic person may take lessons from a sadhu like Vidura and thus be cleansed from the modern effects of modern life. Maharaj Yudhishthira, however, could not find in the palace his two uncles, namely Dhritarashtra and Vidura, along with Gandhari, the daughter of King Subala. He was anxious to see them and therefore asked Sanjaya, the private secretary of Dhritarashtra, to study too. Maharaj, full of anxiety, turned to Sanjaya, who was sitting there, and said, "Oh Sanjaya, where is our uncle, who is old and blind?" Text 33. Where is my well-wisher, Uncle Vidura, and Mother Gandhari, who is very afflicted due to her son's demise? My uncle Dhritarashtra, who is very mortified due to the death of all his sons and grandsons. Undoubtedly, I am very ungrateful. Did he therefore take my offences very seriously and along with sword drown himself in the Ganges? Shrivapas purport. The Pandavas, especially Mahayusha Arjuna, anticipated the after effects of the battle of Kurukshetra and therefore Arjuna declined to execute the fighting. The fight was executed by the will of the Lord, but the effects of the family aggrievement, as they had thought of it before, had to come to be true. Maharaj Yudhishthira was always conscious of the great plight of his uncle Dhritarashtra and Aunt Gandhari, and therefore he took all possible care of him in the old age and aggrieved conditions. When therefore he could not find Uncle Aunt in the palace, naturally his doubts arose, and he conversed that they had gone down into water of Ganges. He thought himself ungrateful because when Pandavas, fatherless Maharaj Dhritarashtra, had given them all royal facilities to live, and in return he had killed Dhritarashtra's son in the battle of Kurukshetra. As a pious man, Yudhishthira Maharaj took into account all the unavoidable misdeeds, and he never thought of misdeeds of his uncle and company. Good. So one should always think, never see bad in others. This is the teaching, I think. Dhritarashtra had suffered the effects of his own misdeeds by the will of the Lord, but Maharaj Yudhishthira was thinking only of his unavoidable misdeeds. This is the nature of good men and devotees of the Lord. A devotee never finds fault with other, but tries to find his own and thus rectify them as far as possible. Text 34. When my father Pandu fell down and we were all small children, these two uncles gave protection from all kinds of calamities. They were always our good well wishers. Alas, where have they gone from here? Text 35. Sutta Goswami said, because of compassion and mental agitation, Sanjaya, not having seen his own master Dhritarashtra, was aggrieved and could not properly reply to Maharaj Yudhishthira. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Sanjaya was a personal assistant of Maharaj Dhritarashtra for a very long time, and thus he had the opportunity to study the life of Dhritarashtra. And when he saw at last Dhritarashtra had left home without his knowledge, his sorrows had no bound. He was fully compassionate towards Dhritarashtra because in the game of Battle of Kurukshetra, King Dhritarashtra had lost everything, men, money, and the last king and the queen had to leave her home in utter frustration. And at last the king and the queen had to leave the home in utter frustration. He studied the situation in his own ways because he did not know that the inner vision of Dhritarashtra has been awakened by Vidura, and that therefore he had left home in enthusiastic cheerfulness for a better life and departure from the dark well of home. Unless one is convinced of the better life after renunciation of the present life, one cannot stick to renounced life. Unless one is convinced of a better life after renunciation of a present life, one cannot stick to renounced order of life simply by artificial rest or staying out of home. Text 36. First, he slowly pacified his mind by intelligence and wiping away his tears and thinking of the feet of his master Dhritarashtra, he began to reply to Maharaj Yudhishthira. Text 37. Sanjay said, my dear descendant of the Kuru dynasty, I have no information of the determination of your two uncles and Gandhari. Okay, Vidura and Dhritarashtra. O king, I have been cheated by these great souls. Shivapachpapa. The great souls cheat others. May be astonishing to know, but it is a fact that great souls cheat others for a greater cause. It is said that Lord Krishna also advised Yudhishthira to tell lie before Dronacharya, and it was also for a great cause. The Lord wanted it, and therefore it was a great cause. Satisfaction of the Lord is the criterion of one who is bona fide, and the highest perfection of life is to satisfy Lord by one's occupational duty. Very important. That is the verdict of Gita and Srimad Bhavatam. Dhritarashtra and Vidura, followed by Gandhari, did not disclose their determination to Sanjaya, although he was constantly with Dhritarashtra as his personal assistant. Sanjay never thought that Dhritarashtra could perform any act without consulting him. But Dhritarashtra was going away from home, was so confidential that it would not be disclosed even to Sanjay. Srila Sanatan Goswami also cheated the keeper of the prison house while going away to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And similarly, Raghunath Das Goswami also cheated his priest and left home for good to satisfy the Lord. To satisfy the Lord, anything is good, for in its for it is in relation with absolute truth. We also had the same opportunity to cheat the family members and leave home to engage in the service of Srimad Bhagavatam. Such cheating was necessary for a greater cause, and there is no loss for any party in such transcendental fraud. Love this. Hari Bol. Text 38. While Sanjaya was thus speaking, Sri Narada, the powerful devotee of the Lord, appeared on the scene carrying his tumburu. Maharaj Yudhishthira and his brother received him properly by getting up from their seats and offering obeisances. Srila Prabhupada, I want to see what's written here. Narada Saha Tumburu. Nice. Shivapaj Prabhupada. Devrishi Narada is described herein as Bhagavan due to being the most confidential devotee of the Lord. The Lord and his very confidential devotees are treated on the same level by those who are actually engaged in this loving service of the Lord. Such confidential devotees of the Lord are very much dear to the Lord because they travel everywhere to preach the glories of the Lord in different capacities and try to utmost convert the non-devotees of the Lord in order to bring them to platform sanity. Actually, the living being cannot be a non-devotee of the Lord because the constitutional position, but when one becomes a non-devotee or non-believer, it is okay. So let me. Actually, a living being cannot be a non-devotee of the Lord because of his constitutional position, but when one becomes a non-devotee, non-believer, it is to ensure that the person concerned is not in sound condition of life. The confidential devotees of the Lord treat such illusion living beings, and therefore they are the most pleasing in the eyes of the Lord. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, no one is dearer to him that one who actually preaches the glories of the Lord to convert the non-believers and non-devotees. Such personalities and Narada must be offered all due respects, like those offered to the personality of Godhead himself. And Maharaja Yudhishthir, along with his noble brothers, were examples for others in receiving a pure devotee of the Lord like Narada, who had no other business save and except singing the glories of the Lord along with Veena, a musical string instrument. Text 39. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "O godly personality, I do not know where my two uncles have gone, nor can I find my ascetic aunt, who is grief stricken by the loss of all her sons." Shivapath's puppet. Maharaj Yudhishthira, as a good soul and devotee of the Lord, was always conscious of the great loss of his aunt and her suffering as an ascetic. An ascetic is never disturbed by all kinds of suffering, and that makes him strong and determined on the path of spiritual progress. Queen Gandhari is a typical example of an ascetic because of a marvelous character in many trying situations. She's an ideal woman as a mother, wife, and ascetic, and in the history of the world, such character in women is rarely found. Text 40. You are like a captain of a ship in a great ocean, and you can direct us to our destination. Thus address the godly personality, Devarshi Narada, greatest of the philosopher devotees. Begin to speak. Sorry. You are like captain of the ship in the great ocean, and you can direct us to our destination. Thus addressed the godly personality Devarshi Narada, greatest of the philosophers, began to speak. Wow. Shivpath's puppet. There are different types of philosopher, and the greatest of all of them are those who have seen the personality of God and have surrendered themselves in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Amongst all such pure devotees of the Lord, Devarshi Narada is the chief, and therefore he has been described herein as the greatest of all philosopher devotees. Unless one has become a sufficiently learned philosopher by hearing the Vedanta philosophy from a bona fide spiritual master, unless one has become a sufficiently learned philosopher by hearing the Vedanta philosophy from a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot be a learned philosopher devotee. Okay, is hearing. One must be very faithful, learned, and renounced. Otherwise, one cannot be a pure devotee. A pure devotee of the Lord can give us direction towards other end of nations. Devashi Narada used to visit the palace of Maharaj Yudhishthira because Pandavas were all pure devotees of the Lord, and Devashi was always ready to give them good counsel whenever needed. Text 41. Shri Narada said, "O pious king, do not lament for anyone, for everyone is under the control of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, all living beings and their leaders carry on worship to be well protected. If all living beings and their leaders carry on worship to be well protected. It is He only who brings them together and disperses them." Shivapath's purpose. Every living being, there either in the material world or in the spiritual world, is under the control of Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead. Beginning from Brahmaji, the leader of the universe, down to the insignificant ant. All are abiding by the order of Supreme Lord. Thus, the constitutional position of the living being is stubborn. Thus, the constitutional position of the living being is subordination under the control of the Lord. The foolish living being, especially men, artificially rebels against the law of the supreme. One second, I have subordination, of the Lord. Foolish living beings, especially men, artificially rebels against the law of the supreme and thus becomes chastised as an asura or lawbreaker. A living being is placed in a particular position by the order of the Supreme Lord, and he can again shift it from the place by the order of the Supreme Lord or his authorization, like Brahma, Shiva, Indra, Chandra, Maharaj Yudhishthir, or in modern history, Napoleon, Akbar, Alexander, Gandhi, Subhash, and Nehru, all servants of the Lord, and they are placed in and removed from the respective position by the will of Supreme Lord. None of them is independent. Even though such men are leaders, even though such men or leaders rebel so as not to recognize the supremacy of the Lord, I don't understand the English, they are put under still more rigorous laws of the material world by different miseries. Only the foolish man therefore says that there is no God. Maharaj Yudhishthira was being convinced of the naked truth because he was greatly overwhelmed by the sudden departure of his old uncles and the aunt. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was placed in that position according to his past deeds. He had already suffered the enjoyed enjoyed the benefits accrued to him in the past, but due to his good luck, somewhat or other, he had a younger brother, Vidura. By his instructions, he left to achieve salvation by closing all accounts in the material world. Ordinarily, one cannot change the course of one's due happiness and distress by plan. Everyone has to accept them as they come under the subtle arrangement of Kala or invincible time. There is no use trying to counteract them. The best thing is therefore that one should endeavor to achieve salvation, and this prerogative is given. The best thing is therefore that one should endeavor to achieve salvation, and this prerogative is given only to a man because of his developed condition of mental activity and intelligence. Only for men are there different Vedic instructions and attainment of salvation during the human form of existence. One who misuses this opportunity of advanced intelligence is barely condemned and put into different types of miseries, either in the present life or in the future. That is the way the Supreme controls everyone. That is the way Supreme controls everyone. One who misuses the opportunity of advanced intelligence is verily condemned and put into different types of miseries, either in the present life or in the future. That is the way of the Supreme. Controls everyone. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Guru